Beneath a blood-red sky, the waters of Slaver's Bay churned with the passage of ships. Scores upon scores of them. Hide-skinned and high-prowed, bristling with banners that fluttered wild in the salt-stained air. Dothraki rode the decks, brown bodies lean and sinewy, adorned with bells that rang in the wind. Swords strapped to their backs, the very image of the horse lords from half a world away. Above them, at the bow of the largest vessel, a mountain of a man stared westward, his black hair braided with the bells of 1,000 victories, his copper skin inked with faded scars. Khal Drogo, the great Khal, stood silent, his eyes fixed on a world he had never seen, a world he would take. He had been dead, by all rights, dead and burned, his soul vanished to join the ancestors in the Nightlands. But the gods, it seemed, had other plans. It was the witch, the Magigi, who had taken him, robbed him of strength, robbed Daenerys of her sun and stars. Yet fire is not so easily conquered, nor the will of a Khal. A healer, outcast from the Red Waste, had come upon the funeral pyre's edge. She had pulled the broken hulk from the ashes, worked her sorcery and her salves for 40 days and nights. When Drogo's eyes opened, it was as if the world itself had awakened. He was not what he had been. The pain in his body lingered like an old friend, his right leg dragging a fraction slower, a shadow of a limp haunting his stride. But his mind was sharper, honed to a knife's edge by suffering and by rage. Across the water, in distant Westeros, the 7 kingdoms bled themselves dry in civil war. Lords and kings tearing at one another like dogs over a bone. Daenerys had whispered of these lands, her birthright, her vengeance. Drogo had listened. Now with his own death cheated, the Dothraki saw him as touched by the gods. Reborn, Khal Drogo meant to seize the land of the Iron Men and make it his own. The sun was low when the first sight of Westeros came, a green smudge on the horizon, the scent of rain and earth so different from the burning sands of Essos. Ships scattered, seeking a place to land. They came to the southern coasts, at the edge of the Reach, where fields rolled fat with wheat and orchards bloomed, unaware of the storm about to break upon them. Dothraki riders swept ashore before the villagers could even flee. Drogo led the charge, his arakh flashing as he bellowed the battle cry that would become legend. Vezhof, Vezhof Ani, blood for my blood. The world had heard tales of the Dothraki, whispers traded in candlelit halls, the horse lords with their endless herds, raiders and reavers beyond the narrow sea. But no man in the Reach had ever seen them in truth. The lightning charge, the bow drawn and loosed at a gallop, the screamer's deadly dance. House Fossaway's banners were torn from their poles and trampled into mud, the harvest put to fire. Khal Drogo did not slaughter wantonly, nor allow his men to linger. He had learned, through Daenerys, through pain, that the world of the Andals and the Knights would not be broken by simple fear. It must be shattered, city by city, field by field. He let the survivors run. Let the story spread, on wind and hoof, of the great Khal come to claim the 7 kingdoms. Word reached Old Town in 3 days, and King's Landing in 7. The lords of the Reach scrambled to gather their levies. Sir Loras Tyrell, Knight of Flowers, rode at the head of 1,000 armored horse, their rose banners raised against a tide of foreigners. The Hightowers summoned the banners of the city, their maesters tolling the bells of war, but the Dothraki did not ride to meet them in the open. They vanished into the fields, raided at night, burned stores and vanished, like ghosts with flint and steel. Drogo watched the Reach convulse in confusion, each lord desperate to defend his own keep, his own people. The Westerosi had fought wars before, but never like this. Knights and sellswords, trained to meet shield to shield, found themselves ambushed in the dark, arrows hissing from the hedgerows. Horses were stolen, crops set to fire, small folk fleeing in terror toward the distant safety of Highgarden. The Dothraki left a trail of smoke that wound through the countryside, always moving, always striking, never caught. Among the Dothraki rode Daenerys, her silver-gold hair bound in braids, her violet eyes cold as the dawn. She had grown hard, her innocence burned away with her husband's pyre. She bore a child now, Khal Drogo's son, swelling her belly with the promise of the stallion who would mount the world. The Dothraki called her Khaleesi still, but with awe. She had crossed the world for her sun and stars, and now brought them into battle with him. The Reach was thrown into panic. Refugees fled north, crowding the roads to King's Landing, bringing wild tales of horse riders and their demon queen. Queen Cersei Lannister, ensconced in her red keep, heard the news with a mixture of disbelief and terror. Her son, King Joffrey, preened upon his throne, boasting that the lion's claws would shred any foreign upstart. Yet even the gold cloaks grew uneasy, whispering that the last time the Dothraki had come, they had ridden with dragons. There were no dragons this time. Rhaegal and Viserion, Dany's fledglings, were still too young to ride, too small to tip the scales in a true war. Yet in the darkness, rumors grew. Some said the dragons were full-grown, hidden in the mist, waiting for the signal. Others said that Khaleesi had turned herself into a dragon, a witch with a whip of flame. Within weeks, the Reach began to fall. The Tyrells, rich and proud, held Highgarden behind stone walls, but their lands burned around them. Drogo did not waste his riders on useless siege. He let hunger do his work. With every storehouse burned, every flock stolen, Highgarden's gold meant less and less. The knights grew desperate, venturing out in doomed sallies, but the Dothraki cut them down and vanished into the night. Fields rotted, grain stores smoldered, and famine crept at the castle gates. As the weeks bled into months, the Dothraki wave rolled outward, always on the move. They raided as far north as the Blackwater, cutting off trade to King's Landing. Lannister patrols disappeared in the woods. Fleabottom, always half-starved, grew swollen with refugees. Cersei sent urgent ravens to her father at Casterly Rock, demanding more gold, more men, more answers. Tywin Lannister did not believe in ghosts or in miracles. He gathered his bannermen, raising a host as great as any Westeros had ever seen. The banners of the Lion and the Crakehall, the Swift and the Stag, marched south toward the burning Reach. Tywin's army was slow and ponderous, weighed down by armor and supply trains, its knights used to battles of shield and honor. Drogo waited. He knew now what it was to be patient, to let the enemy come to him. At the head of his khalasar, he watched the Lannister army stretch for miles, its vanguard a glittering snake of steel and silk. He chose his ground, a narrow valley, where the fields had been burned to stubble, the trees hacked down for firewood. By nightfall, the Dothraki gathered like wolves, silent and ready. The Lannister scouts disappeared one by one, their horses returning riderless. At dawn, as Tywin's army moved through the valley, the Dothraki struck, not in a single wave, but in 1,000 small ones. Raiders pouring from the hillsides, bows singing, arcs flashing in the dust. They cut down outriders, smashed the supply wagons, set fire to the tents. The Westerosi knights tried to rally, but the Dothraki were gone before they could form ranks. For 3 days, the Lannister host bled. By the time Tywin realized he was being lured into a trap, it was too late. The Dothraki closed the valley from both sides, trapping the army in a cauldron of fire and steel. The Lannisters fought like lions, but the Dothraki fought like men who had cheated death, who rode with the certainty of gods at their backs. Drogo himself rode at the head of the final charge. He struck the Lannister vanguard like a thunderbolt, scattering knights and squires before him. Tywin Lannister, face grim as iron, tried to rally his bannermen, but the line broke. In the confusion, Drogo cut a path to the Lion Lord himself, their eyes meeting across the chaos. "You are far from your golden halls, Lord of the Rock," Drogo called, his voice cold as winter. Tywin drew his sword, refusing to yield, but Drogo's auric flashed, knocking the blade aside. The two men circled, the battlefield swirling around them. Screams, steel, blood, and dust. For a heartbeat, the fate of Westeros hung between them. In the end, Tywin was mortal. Drogo's auric took him across the throat, and the Lord of Casterly Rock fell, crimson blossoming on his lion-embroidered cloak. The Lannister host broke, routed, fleeing in panic as the Dothraki swept down upon them. News of Tywin's death rocked the Seven Kingdoms like a thunderclap. At King's Landing, Cersei locked herself in her chambers, refusing to see even her son. The Iron Throne was suddenly more fragile than ever, its claim as thin as the gold leaf that lined its edges. Lords who had once bent the knee to Joffrey began to whisper of the Targaryen girl, the Khaleesi who rode with the deathless Khal. Drogo did not march on King's Landing. Not yet. He knew that a city could not be taken by storm without dragons, and his dragons were not ready. Instead, he rode east, taking the Riverlands by surprise, burning and raiding, making every house pay tribute. The Freys cowered behind their walls, offering hostages and gold. The Starks, battered from their own wars, sent envoys with pledges of neutrality. Drogo took what he wished, leaving the rest in ashes. It was in the Riverlands that the true test came. Stannis Baratheon, the last king of any true power, marched with his own host, seeking to unite the North and South against the invaders. Stannis was iron-willed, his knights hardened by war and loss, his Red Priestess whispering secrets in his ear. But Drogo had learned more than blood and fire in his journey. He had learned of treachery, of alliances that could turn on a single word. He sent envoys to the north, promising them the lands of the traitors. He sent riders to the Vale, gold and the promise of vengeance for old wounds. When the armies met upon the banks of the Trident, Stannis found himself outnumbered, surrounded by foes who had once been friends. The battle was terrible. A storm of arrows and swords and fire, the Trident running red. Stannis fought like a man possessed, refusing to yield, his banners cut down around him. In the end, he died with his sword in his hand, refusing to bend the knee. The Riverlands fell. The North sent word of peace, swearing to keep their own lands. The Vale locked its gates, hiding behind the Erie's stone wings. Khal Drogo stood upon the ruins of Riverrun, his hair uncut, his bells ringing in the wind. Daenerys stood at his side, her hand upon the swollen curve of her belly. They had come as conquerors, but now they were more. A legend, a storm that could not be stopped. The way to King's Landing was open. The Iron Throne waited, glimmering in the distance, its power alive beneath the shadow of fire and blood. The Dothraki rode now not as strangers, but as the new masters of Westeros, and the sun and stars shone above them. Triumphant, unstoppable. But even in victory, the shadow of dragons stretched long. For in the dark, in the crumbling halls of King's Landing, whispers spoke of a last hope. A pale boy king, a queen with a lion's heart, and a prophecy yet unfulfilled. The Game of Thrones was not yet done, and the blood of kings would stain the earth before it ended. Ja. Smoke drifted in low ribbons across the Trident as dawn crept up, gray and chill, upon a land that had forgotten peace. The Riverlands lay battered, their villages sacked, their proud lords humbled or dead. And across the green trampled fields the banners of Khal Drogo's Khalasar billowed like thunderclouds. The Dothraki rode where they pleased now, their horses feasting on trampled wheat, their acts stained by war, their laughter echoing in halls once ruled by river lords. Drogo rode at the head, a shadow thrown long by sunrise, his gaze fixed southward to where the Red Keep's towers needled the sky. The Iron Throne called to him, a lure he did not understand, a seat of power forged from 1,000 years of blood and ambition. He did not crave the cold steel, nor the whispers of courtiers in silk, but Daenerys wanted it, and for Daenerys he would carve the world. The Khaleesi stood at his side in the old god's wood of Riverrun, her hair woven in a braid heavy with bells, her eyes as bright as amethysts in the first light. She listened as messengers came and went, Northmen from White Harbor, grim men of the Vale, river knights pledging fealty now that hope was lost. She received them with the poise of a queen, her hands resting lightly upon her growing belly. Westeros bleeds, husband, she murmured, fingers brushing his arm. But the bleeding will not end with one throne. They will never kneel, not truly, not unless we make them. They hate and fear what they do not know. Drogo nodded. He was not a man of words. He understood blood, fire, the will of the strong. Yet something new had taken root within him since his death and rebirth. A patience cold and unyielding as the grave. He did not answer, but she saw understanding in his eyes. A rider thundered into the godswood, a youth slicked in mud and sweat. The lords gather at Harrenhal. Khal, he gasped. A council? Baratheon? Eren? Frey. They plot, they scheme. They will march soon with all the swords of the east. Daenerys' lips parted in a small smile. Let them come. They will find the world changed beneath their feet. Before them, the river ran sluggish and dark, flecked with the bodies of the slain. The stench of death was heavy in the air. Yet on the far bank, Dothraki children played with carved wooden horses, their laughter a defiance to the sorrow of Westeros. Drogo watched, a strange pang stirring in his chest, and for a moment he thought of Rhaego, his son, dead before he'd drawn breath, and now this new child yet to be born. Blood of my blood, he thought, and wondered what world his line would inherit. Across the realm, chaos took root. Cersei Lannister, Queen Regent of the Seven Kingdoms, stormed her chambers in the Red Keep, flanked by wary gold cloaks. She sent desperate ravens to the Eyrie, to Storm's End, to the ashes of Harrenhal, promising titles, lands, vengeance, anything to stem the tide of the Horse Lords. But the great lords were wary. The Tyrells licked wounds in Highgarden, their fields charred, their coffers bled dry. The Freys clung to their crossing like rats to flotsam, hated and untrusted by all. The Vale brooded behind its mountain gates. House Baratheon, battered and divided, could muster no more than cold stares and hollow threats. And yet, out of the ashes, a new power rose. Young Edmure Tully, broken by war, bent the knee to Daenerys and Drogo, and with his submission the rivers fell silent. In the west, the Lannister banners hung limp, Tywin's corpse buried beneath the Weeping Tower at Casterly Rock, the halls echoing with the footsteps of the uncertain. Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, returned from the Riverlands with a grim tale and a haunted look in his eyes. He had seen the Dothraki ride, seen their Khal, a man of deathless will, who fought like the Reaper's own son. Jaime found Cersei in the solar, pacing like a caged lioness. Her face, once so beautiful, was drawn tight with lines of fury and fear. "They are beasts," she hissed, wine sloshing in her cup. "Foreign animals. We must strike now, while we still have the city, while the Blackwater guards us. The Red Keep is strong. Let them break themselves against our walls. We are Lannisters." He watched her, uncertain. "They do not fight as we do. You have not seen them, Cersei. They are ghosts on horseback. They vanish into mist, strike where you are weakest. The men are afraid. You should be afraid." Cersei bared her teeth. "I am not a child to be frightened by shadows. I am the Lion's daughter. We hold the city. All of the power in the world sits beneath our roof. Let the Horse Lords come." He said nothing, but the memory of the valley's carnage, Tywin's last gurgling breath, haunted him. He knew, as surely as steel met flesh, that something new had come to Westeros, something old as time, unstoppable as tide. In the camps outside River Run, Drogo and Daenerys prepared their next move. The Khalasar swelled, now counting sellswords from across the narrow sea, broken men seeking new masters, and the remnants of Westeros' beaten houses. Daenerys' household had grown, a court without a castle, a family of exiles and outcasts. Ser Jorah Mormont rode at her side, bearded and gruff, his sword never far from her hand. Missandei kept the ledgers, translating the tangled oaths of fealty into the Dothraki tongue. Grey Worm drilled the Unsullied in the ruined bailey, their spears a wall against any last stand. Each evening, fires ringed the riverbank, the air thick with the scent of roast horse and the songs of the steppe. Dothraki boys told tales of the Nightlands. Westerosi girls wept for home. And at the center of it all, Drogo and Daenerys plotted, quiet and watchful, as a storm gathered to the south. "Let them come," Drogo said, sharpening his arak by firelight. "We will break them on the open ground." Daenerys shook her head, her hand absently stroking her belly. "Westeros is not the Dothraki Sea, my sun and stars. Their castles are stone. Their walls run high as mountains. If we break them in the field, another lord will rise to take their place. We must make them see that the old world is ended. We must be more than conquerors." Then? Drogo grunted. "Then we burn their world." She smiled, a flash of teeth in the fire's glow. "Not with fire alone. With mercy where we can. With justice where they beg for it. If we take the throne by blood alone, we will rule a kingdom of corpses." "No, Drogo. We will do what Aegon did. Only better. We will show them a new world." Her words, so different from the Khal's bloody wisdom, took root among the Dothraki. Some scoffed. Some bristled at the thought of sparing any enemy. But all saw her power. She was Khaleesi, but she was more breaker of chains, bringer of dragons. When she spoke, the wind seemed to hush and listen. The new banners flew, Targaryen black and red beside the bronze of the great Khal. In the mornings, Daenerys visited her dragons, locked in the wooden cages they'd outgrown, pacing and snarling, their gold and green eyes fixed on her. Rhaegal and Viserion, grown to the size of war horses, snapped at their tethers, hungry for freedom. "They will soon be ready," Daenerys told Jorah one dawn, watching smoke spiral from Rhaegal's nostrils. "The time will come, and when it does, no castle wall will keep us out." He bowed. "Westeros has not seen true dragons in 300 years, Khaleesi. When they fly, all will kneel." She nodded, though a shadow crossed her eyes. "Not all will kneel. Some will burn. But so be it." Across the realm, the lords gathered for war. At Harrenhal, beneath the melted towers, Roose Bolton arrived with the dregs of the north, his banners wet with old blood. The Arryns, proud behind their falcons, sent knights and archers. The Baratheons, whittled down to Gendry, bastard turned lord, mustered Storm's End. Petyr Baelish, sly and silver-tongued, whispered promises of support to whoever would listen. They formed a new alliance, desperate and fragile, united only by their fear of the Khal and his dragon queen. They named it the Pact of Harrenhal, a last bulwark against the coming storm. Envoys were sent to King's Landing, where Cersei played them against one another, promising the moon and the sun. But the Dothraki moved swift as wind. Before the pact could muster, Khal Drogo struck. He divided his khalasar, sending swift riders into the riverlands to harry supply trains, to burn bridges and poison wells. At the same time, the Unsullied marched west, taking Moat Cailin and sealing the north away from the wars to come. Daenerys herself led a force of freedmen and exiles toward the King's Road, her dragons gliding above, shadows in the clouds. No lord in Westeros had seen war like this. Night after night, camps were torched, patrols vanished, banners shredded and cast into the river. Lords awoke to find their vassals fled, their halls stripped of food and arms. In the confusion, the Dothraki closed the ring around Harrenhal. The great battle that followed was unlike any in living memory. Under a crescent moon, the Dothraki descended in 1,000 waves, araks gleaming, bows singing death. The lords of the pact rallied behind Roose Bolton and Gendry Baratheon, fighting beneath broken banners, but they were outnumbered, outmatched, outflanked. Daenerys unleashed her dragons for the first time, setting Harrenhal's ruined towers ablaze. Fire raining upon knights and small folk alike, the cries of the dying mingled with the roars of dragons, and the smell of burning flesh haunted the trident for miles. By dawn, the pact was broken. Bolton fell beneath a Dothraki blade, Gendry fled with the tattered remnants of his men, and the Arryn banners were trampled in the mud. In the aftermath, Daenerys strode through the shattered camp, the smoke curling about her, her white hair streaming like a banner in the wind. The survivors, lords, knights, hedge wizards, Small folk knelt in mud and blood, their eyes wide with awe and terror. She raised her voice, clear as a bell in the dawn. I am Daenerys Stormborn, the blood of old Valyria, the unburnt Khaleesi of the great grass sea. I have come not to destroy, but to free you from the chains of fear and war. Kneel, and you shall have my justice. Stand against me, and you shall have my fire. They knelt. How could they not? Her dragon circled above, casting shadows long as the day itself. The Dothraki pressed in behind her, swords drawn, their faces fierce and proud. And beside her, Khal Drogo, the unburnt, the unbroken, watched as the world bent to his wife's will. News raced ahead of the army like wildfire. Lords who had once mocked the Dragon Queen now bent the knee without a fight. Highgarden, starving and shattered, surrendered after a single day of siege. The Westerlands, bereft of Tywin's iron hand, sent envoys with chests of gold and silver, seeking only to keep their lands. The Vale, ever aloof, sent the Erie's falcons as a token of respect and obedience. And so, in the last days of autumn, Daenerys and Drogo marched south toward King's Landing. The city, swollen with refugees, braced for a siege unlike any before. On the ramparts, Cersei watched, golden hair gleaming in the late sun. Her face pale, but her jaw set with a lion's pride. She stood beside Joffrey, who gripped the Iron Throne with sweating hands, barking orders to the Kingsguard. But the city was restless. Food ran low. The gold cloaks grew sullen and angry. The small folk muttered that dragons flew again, that a new queen came with fire and mercy. The faith, cowed but watchful, waited for a sign from the gods. The siege began with thunder and rain. The Dothraki ringed the city, their banners blotting the fields. Daenerys dragons circled overhead, their roars echoing in the stone corridors of the Red Keep. Day after day, the city waited. Joffrey postured. Cersei plotted. Jaime watched the walls. Sword never far from his reach. One night, under a hidden moon, Daenerys sent her terms. A single rider, Missandei, rode through the mud gate beneath a flag of truce. She stood before the Iron Throne and spoke the Queen's words. Kneel, and you shall live. Kneel, and the city shall not burn. Resist, and you shall face the wrath of dragons. Cersei laughed, but it was a brittle, empty sound. Let her come, she said, and turned her back on mercy. It was then that Jaime made his choice. That night, he crept into Joffrey's chamber, silent as a cat. He looked at the boy king, spoiled, terrified, cruel, and saw in him a shadow of all that was wrong with Westeros. He killed Joffrey with a single silent thrust, then crept to his sister's chambers. She saw the blood on his hands and understood. You think this will save us? It may save the city, he whispered. It may save you. Dawn broke red and cold. Jaime threw open the gates, riding out with the white banner of peace. He surrendered the city in the Queen's name, and in return, Daenerys spared King's Landing. She entered the city at noon, her dragons gliding overhead, her armies marching in ordered ranks. The small folk poured into the streets, some cheering, some weeping, all watching as the Dragon Queen passed. She mounted the steps of the Red Keep, her hand in Drogo's, and entered the throne room. There, upon the twisted iron, she found Jaime waiting, sword laid at her feet. Cersei, proud to the last, stood beside him, her face pale as milk. Daenerys looked at the throne, at the jagged crown of the realm she had claimed, and then at her husband. He met her gaze, and in that look, the future of Westeros was forged, not in fire alone, but in the joining of blood and will. I am Daenerys Targaryen, first of her name, she said, her voice ringing through the hall, and this kingdom is reborn. Ilandi. The throne room of the Red Keep was a vault of shadow and echo, the air thick with the old iron tang of 1,000 blades. The Iron Throne itself rose from the flagstones like a blackened mountain, forged from swords surrendered and broken, each a trophy, each a warning. Daenerys stood before it, a hush settling around her, as if the stone itself dared not breathe. Behind her, Khal Drogo's massive presence filled the hall, his arakh gleaming where torchlight caught the edge, his face impassive and watchful. The Dothraki guards flanked the doors, silent and tense, their dark eyes roving over the assembled crowd of Westerosi lords, half-broken and uncertain, crowded close behind Jaime and Cersei Lannister. No banners flew in the throne room now. No lion, no stag, no rose or wolf or falcon. Only the black and red of House Targaryen and the bronze of Drogo's own blood riders. The city held its breath. The kingdom balanced on a knife's edge, each noble and knight and small folk waiting for a word, a gesture, the moment when fate would shift at last. Daenerys looked upon the throne, but her eyes slid past the swords to the faces in the hall. Lords who had defied her, lords who had bent the knee, the scattered remnants of a realm undone. She saw Sir Davos, grizzled and scarred, a Baratheon man now adrift. Brienne of Tarth, sword in hand, gaze steady and wary. Tyrion Lannister, slight and silent, his wit coiled behind a grave mask. Grey Worm and the Unsullied waited in disciplined rows, their faces expressionless as always, but their spears sharp and ready. Jaime stepped forward, his white cloak stained with blood, his golden hair loose on his shoulders. He knelt, his head bowed, and laid the king's sword at Daenerys' feet. "Your Grace," he said, his voice rough with fatigue, "King's Landing is yours. The blood that has been spilled cannot be washed away, but perhaps new hands may yet build something from the ruin. I am yours to judge." Daenerys regarded him for a long moment. She remembered stories whispered in Qarth, in Astapor, in the deserts of the Red Waste, of the Kingslayer, the man who slew his king to save a city. She saw the shadow of those legends in Jaime's face, and heard in his words the burden of 1,000 crimes. She nodded once. "Rise." "Sir Jaime, you have done what few would dare." He rose, his shoulders bowed beneath invisible weight. Cersei did not kneel. Her chin lifted in defiance, green eyes flashing. "Do you mean to kill me now, Dragon Queen?" She spat. "Will you burn the city after all? Or will you play at mercy, like the men before you?" Daenerys regarded her, the hush growing deeper. She stepped closer, Drogo just behind her, the threat of his blade a silent promise. "I am not here to play at anything," Daenerys said, her voice quiet but hard as Valyrian steel. "Westeros has been ruled by fear and lies for too long. The fires that swept your city have not come from dragons, but from men's pride. If you wish to kneel, kneel. If not, you may take a ship east at dawn, never to return." Cersei's face worked through fury, pride, and at last, a brittle, hollow laugh. "You are merciful then, fitting for a conqueror. I will go, but know this, the lion bows to no one. The realm will not kneel forever. Men too." Daenerys inclined her head, as if Cersei's defiance were little more than wind in the leaves. "Your time is ended. Go, before I change my mind." The Queen's court watched as Cersei swept from the hall, her crimson gown trailing like a stain, her son's crown clutched in her white-knuckled grip. The old order fled at her heels. Some lords bowed deeply, others cast sidelong, calculating glances, measuring the future in terms of profit, survival, and fear. Daenerys turned to her blood riders, cleared the throne room. The lords and ladies departed, muttering, eyes wide, swept out by the Unsullied in a tide of silence and steel. Only her chosen few remained: Drogo, Tyrion, Jorah, Missandei, Grey Worm, and, surprisingly, Jaime and Brienne, who lingered together at the periphery like ghosts uncertain of their place in the world. At last, Daenerys stood before the Iron Throne. It loomed above her, ancient and terrible, the legacy of her blood and her destiny. She ran her fingers over the swords, felt the cold bite of centuries, the promise and the peril entwined in every blade. She climbed the steps slowly and sat, her back straight, her gaze fixed on the horizon seen through broken windows. In that moment, the city outside erupted in cheers and shouts, a tide of sound rolling up from the streets as word spread. The Dragon Queen had claimed the throne. The war was ended. For now. Drogo came to her side, his hand resting on the pommel of his aura. "It is yours, moon of my life." She looked up at him, the faintest hint of a smile curling her lips. "Ours," she replied softly. "And now the true work begins." The days that followed were a blur of decree and decision, justice and judgment. Daenerys sat in council every morning, her throne room filled with supplicants and survivors, lords of the Reach, of the Westerlands, of the North and the Vale, each seeking favor or forgiveness, some daring to make demands. The small folk lined the streets, some in awe, some in hope, some in suspicion, but all drawn by the legend of the Dragon Queen. She named Tyrion her hand, his sharp mind already turning to the work of repair. She granted amnesty to those who bent the knee, stripped titles from those who would not. Highgarden was placed under the stewardship of a Tyrell cousin, loyal and pragmatic. The Riverlands remained under Edmure Tully, watched by Dothraki riders. The North, wary and proud, sent word from Sansa Stark, offering uneasy fealty, their banners held high but their eyes watchful. In her private chambers, Daenerys met with her closest advisors. Maps sprawled across the tables. Reports of unrest or famine lay stacked beside scrolls of tribute and supply. Missandei read dispatches from the docks, where ships arrived daily from Essos with grain, artisans and old friends from distant lands. Jorah stood sentinel, his sword laid across his lap, ever vigilant for the ghosts of old betrayal. Drogo, unused to the slow grind of politics, stalked the halls with his bloodriders, keeping the peace through sheer presence. The Dothraki adapted to the city in their own way, galloping down the wide boulevards, teaching the small folk to ride, their laughter and wild cries a new sound beneath the towers of King's Landing. Some of the Westerosi lords grumbled at their presence, but none dared challenge the Khal who had slain Tywin Lannister and shattered the armies of the Pact. The dragons, grown near the size of elephants now, roosted in the ruins of Maegor's Holdfast. They hunted the Blackwater, their shadows sweeping over ships and market stalls alike. Each morning Daenerys visited them, her heart torn between pride and anxiety, knowing that they were both her greatest weapon and her greatest danger. The city lived in awe and fear of them. When Rhaegal soared overhead, all eyes turned skyward. When Viserion bellowed in the night, the small folk crossed themselves and prayed. Justice, Daenerys learned, was not so simple as victory. Old wounds ran deep in Westeros. Bands of Lannister loyalists harried the roads west of the city. Tyrell men fought Tarly holdouts in the Reach. The Faith, wary of this foreign queen, counseled patience to their followers. But in secret, many High Septons sent letters to Dorne, to the Stormlands, to anywhere not yet touched by dragonfire. Yet with every passing week, the realm settled, if not healed. The small folk brought grievances and left with justice. Sometimes harsh, but always swift. Daenerys abolished the worst of the old taxes, opened the granaries, and decreed the repair of the city's crumbling aqueducts. She ordered the sept rebuilt, the bells rehung, the city swept clean. Her mercy was not endless. Cersei, refusing to set sail at dawn, was found trying to rouse the Gold Cloaks to revolt. She was dragged before the Queen's justice. Ser Jorah, now wearing the black and red, and banished to the black cells. When Jaime pleaded for her life, Daenerys listened, and in a private audience heard his story, his love, his guilt, the shape of his redemption. She let Cersei live, but ordered her confined to a tower under guard. Her legacy ended, her power broken. Days blurred into months. Winter's bite grew sharp, though the snow that came was lighter than in the north. The markets filled with food, the city's wounds healed. With spring came envoys from the far corners of the realm. Dorne, sending peace and oranges. The Iron Islands, Yara Greyjoy proud and unbending, offering ships for peace and a voice in council. The Vale, Sansa's cousin Robin, grown sly and wary, pledging fealty in exchange for security and trade. In the evenings, Daenerys and Drogo walked the ramparts above the city, the wind tangling her hair, his hand heavy on her shoulder. She spoke of dreams, of a realm united, not by fear, but by hope. He listened, sometimes smiling, sometimes silent, but always present. The rock on which her world was built. "You have given them peace," Drogo said one night, the lights of the city burning like fireflies below. "But peace is never a gift. It is a prize taken, held, and defended." She looked out over King's Landing, the sprawl of rooftops and lanterns, the distant shimmer of the Blackwater. "You are right. There will always be those who resist. Always men like Cersei, like Tywin, who believe power is their birthright. But we will meet them together." He grinned, a flash of wolfish teeth. "They have never faced a Khalazar such as this." She laughed, the sound rolling over the ramparts, bright and strong. "No, nor a queen such as me. Their son was born in late spring." The bells of the great sept tolling as the city rejoiced. He was named Rhaego, for the boy lost and the world gained. A child of fire and blood, his skin copper bronze, his hair dark as night, but shot with pale threads. The Dothraki howled his name from the rooftops. The Westerosi whispered of omens and portents. Daenerys cradled him in her arms, tears in her eyes, Drogo at her side, fierce with pride. A great feast was held in the Red Keep. Lords from every corner of the realm came to pay homage, to drink to the new prince, to witness the birth of an age both old and new. Tyrion toasted the queen, his wit sharp and biting as ever. Jorah looked on, content at last. Brienne guarded the queen's table, her sword in honor unyielding. The hall rang with laughter and hope, the promise of better days. Yet outside the walls, the world did not sleep. In the wild north, where winter still reigned, a shadow moved. An ancient power, roused by war and blood, stirring in the dark. Rumors of white shadows and dead men crept down the king's road, dismissed by most as the tales of frightened children. But Daenerys listened. She sent ravens to Winterfell, to the Night's Watch, asking for news. She ordered her dragons to patrol further north, their eyes bright in the winter night. For peace, she knew, was only ever a pause, a brief and precious breath before the world turned again. She had taken Westeros, forged it new in the fires of war and hope. But the true test, she knew, was only beginning. On a night thick with rain, as thunder rolled above the city, Daenerys stood in the godswood, Rhaego at her breast, Drogo at her side. The wind swept through the weirwood branches, their leaves red as blood. She looked up at the sky, the dragons circling above, and smiled. The realm was hers, but her destiny, and her child's, lay not only on the Iron Throne, but in all the world beyond. The lands of winter, the shores of old Valyria, the mysteries of ice and fire, yet unwritten. She whispered a promise to the boy in her arms. "You will know a world remade, little one. A world your father and I have forged together." Venom? And as the bells rang out over King's Landing, and the dawn broke across the dragon banners and the blood-red sky, Daenerys Targaryen knew at last that the story of conquest was only the beginning. The story of peace, of justice, of hope. Her story had only just begun. Kay. Summer's breath lingered over the city as it had not for years. The morning air carried the scent of the Blackwater, brine and rot and faint lemon blossom, tangled together like all things in King's Landing. 1,000 banners snapped and shivered over the red walls, black dragons beside Dothraki bronze. The lion's golden thread unraveled and swept aside. Within the Red Keep, the pulse of power beat steady but unsteady, hopeful but hunted, for though Daenerys Targaryen had seized the Iron Throne, she had inherited every danger that sat the seat before her. In the high garden overlooking the bay, Daenerys knelt in the dew-wet grass, her son cooing in her arms. Rhaego, strong and lusty, clutched at a tendril of her silver blonde hair, tugging it with the stubbornness of a Khal's son. His dark eyes were solemn, old for a babe, and Daenerys felt a thrill every time she looked at him. A thrill and a terror. Drogo watched her from the shadow of a fig tree, arms folded, every inch the warrior and king. But there was something softer in his gaze now. Pride tempered with caution. The city and the world beyond teetered between peace and chaos. And he knew, as she did, that new conquests would bring new enemies. They lingered in those gardens as long as they dared, before duty summoned them. Daenerys had brought peace with fire, but peace would wither if left unguarded. In the council chambers, she ruled, day after day, Tyrion at her left. Sharp-tongued and quick-eyed, Missandei at her right, voice of sense and justice. Jorah Mormont paced behind, quietly counseling patience, ever watchful for the enemies that did not come in open war, but in slow poison, shadow, and whispered word. Their small council was a thing both new and old. Westeros had never known its like, a queen of foreign birth, a Khal as consort, a hand who had once been the shame of Lannister pride. But it worked, more or less. Lords who had never spoken with Dothraki now did so daily, learning the gestures of peace, the meanings of horse and blood and gift. Trade began to flow again. Ships bearing fruit and wool from the Reach, silver from the west, smoked fish and pine from the north, oranges and silk from Dorne, iron and salt from the Isles. But with commerce came trouble. The faith grumbled in their septs, weary of the foreign queen and her dragons. The remains of Lannister loyalists plotted from the shadowed edges of the Westerlands, and in the gutters of King's Landing itself. A rash of fires in Flea Bottom brought panic one night, spreading through the thatched roofs until a rainstorm. Some said sent by the gods, others by a Magi in Daenerys' employ, doused the flames before they could reach the richer quarters. Daenerys sat judgment in the throne room, listening to pleas and grievances. She dispensed justice with a measured hand, never cruel, but never weak. When a Tyrell knight drew steel on a Dothraki rider in the Street of Sisters, both men were tried before her. She heard their words, questioned the witnesses, and then ordered each to pay restitution and serve together for a moon's turn in the city watch. Her sentence was met with grumbling at first, then laughter, then grudging respect. Word spread. The Dragon Queen was just. Outside the city, the realm itself shifted like a patient waking from a fever. In the north, Sansa Stark ruled from Winterfell, fiercely loyal in name but cautious in deed. Daenerys sent envoys, not soldiers, and Sansa replied with a promise of peace, so long as the north was left to its own laws. In the Vale, Robin Arryn clung to his throne, more puppet than lord. But Petty Baelish was gone, strangled on Daenerys' command in the throne room when his plotting was discovered. The Aerys Knights rode for the crown now, their loyalty bought with marriage alliances and fat trade contracts. In the Reach, Lady Olenna was gone, but her wisdom remained. Her chosen heir, a young cousin with wit enough to bend and not break, sent carts of grain and wine, and in return, Daenerys allowed the Reach's laws and customs to endure. Dorne, always apart, swore fealty anew but kept its own prince, its own sand-swept pride. The Iron Islands, Yara Greyjoy at their helm, pledged ships for peace and plunder, so long as the faith and laws of their salt throne were honored. Yet beneath this surface peace, old wounds festered. Men who had once called themselves lords of the realm plotted in exile. Varys sent word of meetings in Pentos, Myr and Bravos, where exiled knights and bitter heirs whispered of assassins and sellswords. Daenerys' spymaster had become an invisible shadow in her court, moving in silence, always listening. Tyrion trusted him, but Daenerys did not fully. She knew now that even the wisest advisor could keep secrets, and she would never again be surprised by poison or betrayal. It was in these uneasy days that news came from the Wall. Jon Snow, Lord Commander, sent a raven. Wildlings had vanished north of the Wall, and the old haunts were empty. The dead were walking again, he wrote. White shadows glimpsed at dusk and dawn, vanishing before a torch or a sword. At first, Daenerys dismissed it as the same old tales. But the letters came more often. Grim, urgent, desperate. She gathered her council. The chamber was lit with shafts of dusty sunlight. Tyrion spread the ravens before them, his face grave. It could be lies. It could be northern panic, he said. But I have seen too much to scoff at the dead walking. Samwell Tarly swears by it. And Jon Snow's word is good. Drogo bristled. I have seen many strange things, Khaleesi. But dead men walking? The dead belong to the Nightlands. Daenerys touched his hand. We have dragons. If there is threat beyond the wall, we must face it together. Jorah nodded. Better to meet the cold in strength than to wait for it to sweep down in darkness. So Daenerys resolved to ride north. She left the city in the care of her council. Tyrion as regent, Missandei as chancellor, Grey Worm commanding the Unsullied and the city watch. She took her dragons, a host of Dothraki, and a handful of trusted knights and lords. Rhaego remained in King's Landing, watched over by Jorah and the Queen's Guard. But Drogo would not be parted from her side. Their journey north was swift and hard. As they passed through the Riverlands, the scars of war showed in ruined villages and haunted woods. But they found welcome in every hall. Lords and smallfolk alike remembered the Reach's burned fields and the justice Daenerys had brought. At Winterfell, Sansa greeted her at the gate, proud but not cold, and offered guest right. The two queens walked the Godswood in the snow, their breath white in the air. I do not love the South, nor all its ways, Sansa said as the wind stirred her auburn hair. But I do not wish to see the world drowned in darkness. If the dead walk, you will have the North's swords. Beim. Daenerys thanked her, knowing this was the most she would ever be offered. She rode out with Sansa's best men beside her, a small host but swift, and pressed on to the wall. There she met Jon Snow. The years had hardened him. His hair streaked with gray, his face lined with worry. But his eyes were the same, dark and earnest. You've come, he said, voice soft as the falling snow. I have dragons now, Jon Snow. If the dead rise, they will burn. He nodded, and together they climbed the wall. Below them, the world stretched white and endless, the forest a shadow, the sky a leaden promise of storms. Jon showed her the signs, the abandoned villages, the strange tracks in the snow, the bones gnawed clean. He told her of the whites, the others, the king in the cold. Daenerys listened, and for the first time, she felt the old fear rise, a fear deeper than any Lannister plot, colder than the winter wind. She held Drogo's hand tight and summoned her dragons. That night, they flew over the haunted forest, great wings stirring the snow, fire flickering in their throats. The wildlings' old camps were empty, the trees silent as the grave. In the darkness below, something moved. A ripple through the drifts, a shadow that fled from the dragon's fire. They found no armies of the dead, but Daenerys saw enough to believe. We must prepare, she told Jon as dawn broke over the wall. Westeros cannot be divided. Not now. Send word to every lord and city. Winter is here. So began the mustering of the realm. Ravens flew from the wall, from Winterfell, from King's Landing, calling banners old and new. The North sent its spears and archers, the Reach its cavalry, the Vale its knights, Dorne its light horse and its poisons. The Ironborn came, grim and fierce, with longships and axes. Even the Stormlands answered, sending what men they could muster. For a brief and shining moment, all the old hatreds faded beneath the greater threat. Daenerys and Drogo led the host south of the wall, dragons circling overhead. The winter wind cut like knives, but the fires burned bright in 100 camps. The old songs were sung again, of the long night, of heroes who stood against the dark. Jon Snow walked among the men, a legend now, the man who had died and returned, the friend of wildlings and queen alike. The dead came with the new moon. Their arrival was not marked by horns or drums, but by a silence so deep it crushed the breath from the world. The first sentries vanished without a sound. Then the white shadows swept from the trees, cold blue eyes burning, swords of ice glinting in the starlight. The whites followed, howling, clawing, deathless. The battle that followed was chaos and slaughter, a storm of steel and fire and cold. Daenerys rode Rhaegal, flames streaming from his jaws, burning ranks of the dead to ash. Drogo fought on foot, his arak singing, Dothraki at his back, carving a red path through the frozen ranks. Jon Snow and Sansa stood with the northern host, swords in hand, their banners whipping in the wind. Tyrion, in his armor, rallied broken lines and saved lives with a word or a well-placed dart of wit. The Night King came at last, tall and terrible, mounted on a dead horse, his blade dark as moonless ice. He raised his arms, and the dead rose again, slaughtered soldiers returning to fight their friends. For a moment, hope faltered. But Daenerys, atop her dragon, met the Night King in the heart of the battle. Flame met ice, and the world shuddered. The Night King lifted his spear and hurled it at Rhaegal, but Drogo, never a man to watch from afar, rode beneath on a living charger, leaping and hurling his own spear. It struck the Night King in the chest. Valyrian steel, old as the world, gifted to him by Daenerys on the day of their victory. The Night King staggered, fell, and the spell shattered. The dead crumbled to dust. The ice retreated. The sun broke over the mountains, cold and bright. The world was saved, but the cost was heavy. The field was littered with the bodies of the brave and the foolish, heroes whose names would live in song. Daenerys wept for the lost, but her heart was steady. She had seen the true enemy, and she had triumphed. Afterward, the host returned south, the banners trailing in the wind, songs of victory and mourning rising over the snow. Daenerys was crowned in the God's Wood of Winterfell, Jon and Sansa at her side, Drogo holding their son aloft before the old heart tree. The realm was united, if only for a breath, in hope. In the years that followed, peace settled slowly, warily, upon the land. Daenerys rebuilt the city, planted new fields, raised new halls. Rhaegal grew strong and tall, learning to ride and to read, a prince of two worlds. The dragons patrolled the sky, guardians of peace and fire. The people learned new songs, of the queen who came from across the sea, of the Khal who made the world his own, of the night the dead came and the dawn that followed. Yet Daenerys never forgot that peace was only a pause, that the wheel would always turn. She ruled wisely, with fire and mercy, never yielding to fear or pride. And as her son grew, as the world healed, as the scars of war faded to memory, she watched the horizon, always ready for the next storm, for she was the Dragon Queen, and her reign was not the end, but a beginning. Okay. The red and gold of dawn spilled across the city, painting the domes and spires of King's Landing in fire. Daenerys stood at her balcony, Rhaegal perched on her hip, the wind tossing his dark curls, her silver hair lifting in the breeze. Below, the streets hummed to life. A city not quite at peace, but no longer trembling. She watched market stalls bloom with spring's bounty. Lemons from Dorne, river trout, apricots and barley, wool dyed blue and green, even the rarest treat, honeyed figs from the reach. The scents drifted upward on the wind, mingling with the salt of the black water and the faint wild musk of dragons. Rhaegal and Viserion roosted atop the towers, restless, their great wings folding in and unfolding, bronze and gold and green shimmering in the growing light. When a bell sounded, a single clear note, the signal for council, Rhaegal lifted his head, loosed a roar that echoed across the bay, and the market went silent for a heartbeat, then continued as if nothing had happened. The city was learning, Daenerys thought. Westeros was learning. Fire and blood had opened the door, but now it was justice, routine, and mercy that would build the realm's new foundations. She kissed her son's brow, handed him to Missandei, and wrapped a cloak about her shoulders, the black and red of House Targaryen. Down winding halls and marble stairs, through columns and banners, she came to the small council chamber. The table was full. Tyrion at her left, as always, cups and scrolls scattered in controlled chaos. Sir Davos, wrinkled as an old apple, but sharp as a dagger. Brienne armored, her sword laid carefully beside her. Yara Greyjoy, hair braided with coral and iron. And at the far end, Sansa Stark, pale and watchful, the cold of the north in her eyes even in spring. Daenerys took her seat. The council fell silent. "Your Grace," Tyrion began, "the Riverlands are quiet, though Tarly men grumble. The harvests in the Reach are stronger than expected. Highgarden sends another 3 barge loads of grain. Casterly Rock's mines are producing again, though less gold than Lord Lannister would have us believe." He glanced at Sansa with a small smile, and she inclined her head, wary but not unfriendly. Brienne cleared her throat. "We've had only minor disturbances in the city. A handful of gold cloaks caught on the take. Sir Grey Worm's men have handled it." Davos spoke, voice rough with salt and smoke. "There's word from White Harbor. The Mermen's banners ride south, bringing trade and news. The north holds to its own laws, but their food flows south, and their steel as well. Lady Sansa, your kin are loyal as ever." "Them?" Sansa smiled faintly, a hint of pride in her voice. "The North remembers, your Grace. But they will not be ruled as children, nor suffer fools for lords." Daenerys inclined her head. "Nor should they. The realm is a tapestry, not a chain." She glanced at Yara. "And the Ironborn?" Yara's mouth curled in a crooked grin. "We raid less, trade more. Some of my captains chafe at the leash, but the gold flows and the seas are ours. The Iron Islands send you their swords." "All save a few exiles," Tyrion murmured, scratching a note. "There are always a few who cannot see the dawn for the ashes of yesterday." Missandei entered with letters, setting them before the queen. "Ravens from Dorne, your Grace? The prince requests your counsel. Something stirs in the east, in the ruins of Volantis. There are also tidings from Braavos and Oldtown, and a sealed letter from the Citadel." Daenerys nodded, fingers brushing the Citadel's wax. She broke the seal, scanned the neat, cramped writing, her face grave. "The Archmaesters ride a fever in the west, near Lannisport. It spreads swiftly. The city is under quarantine. I will send aid and healers, and open the granaries." She looked to Sansa and Brienne. "Let the North send white root and birch bark, as the Maesters request. The Reach can send lemon and honey." Davos spoke again quietly. "There's more. Word from beyond the wall. Jon Snow and Tormund report that most of the free folk have settled in the Gift. They've begun tilling the land, keeping the old gods' ways, but trading with the North. They send thanks for your mercy, and warn that wild wolves prowl the woods, some not of flesh and blood." Nemshas. The memory of the dead, of that last battle in the snow, lingered in every face. Daenerys felt it always, a cold shadow behind her heart. "Let them be watched," she said, "but let them live free." The council turned to other business. Coin, water, roads, law.g. The minutes slipped past, the city shifting below them. When the council was done, Daenerys lingered with Sansa, the two women walking the ramparts above the Red Keep. "It is not so different here," Sansa said, watching the city sprawl. "Rivals. Secrets, lords who smile with daggers in their sleeves. But your dragons, they make a difference." Daenerys smiled. "I once thought they would be all I needed. Now I know. It is not dragons that keep peace, but people willing to build something new." Sansa's voice was soft. "The North may never love the South, but I believe in what you're building. The peace you bought was paid for in blood, but it can last. If you keep listening." Daenerys touched her arm in gratitude. "And will the North stand beside me when the time comes?" Sansa's answer was simple, "Sure. So long as you keep your word, so long as you rule with justice, not fear." The Queen's days settled into a rhythm, ruling, judging, listening, building. But always, her mind wandered east. Rumors reached her, a new power rising in the ruins of Volantis, priests and sellswords gathering under the red banners of RLR. A woman, some said, walked barefoot through fire and shadow, calling herself the true Phoenix, the living flame. Tyrion laughed at such tales, but Daenerys did not. She remembered the taste of fire, the price of prophecy. She sent spies, Varys little birds, Yara's captains, sellswords who owed her gold and blood. Their news was troubling. The Red Priests were not only gathering in Volantis, but sending missionaries into Westeros, stirring the faithful. Some called Daenerys Azor Ahai, the promised savior. Others called her false queen, dragon witch, breaker of old gods. In the alleys of King's Landing, fires sometimes flared at night, candles to the red god, or angry torches in the hands of zealots. One evening, as dusk painted the city in amethyst and gold, Daenerys summoned Melisandre, the Red Woman, who had returned to the capital after the war. They met in the old sept, its walls rebuilt, but its air still full of incense and memory. "You see shadows where I see light," Daenerys said quietly, watching the flames. Melisandre's eyes were black and endless. "All light casts shadow, your grace. The Lord of Light has chosen you, but so too does darkness choose its champions. There are others who would rule, others who burn." Daenerys studied the priestess, weighing her words. "I am not a god's puppet. My reign is for the living, not for fire or prophecy." Melisandre smiled, enigmatic as the night. "The war for Dawn is ended, but the war for men's souls is never done. Beware the priests of Volantis. Beware those who speak in fire and see only their own visions. Rule with mercy, but keep your sword sharp." Afterward, Daenerys returned to her rooms, her mind churning. Drogo was there, waiting, Rhaego asleep beside him. He looked at her, saw the shadows in her eyes. "The East?" he asked. "Do you ride to conquer it too?" She sat beside him, took his hand in hers. "No, not yet, but something stirs. Not war, but something old, a hunger, a calling. The world does not rest." Drogo brushed her hair from her face. "Let the world stir. You are not alone. The Khalasar stands behind you. Your blood rides with you, always." She kissed him. Let the tension melt for a moment. Just a moment, into warmth and certainty. The seasons turned. Rhaego learned to ride, to speak in both Dothraki and the tongue of Westeros, to read and to run with the city's children. The people called him the Silver Wolf, for his wild spirit and quick smile. The city healed, the roads grew safe, the fields lush. In distant corners, there was always unrest, but no longer war. From the east, the Red Priests sent envoys, diplomats robed in scarlet and gold, bearing gifts and prophecies. Some sought to ally, others to warn, still others to convert. Daenerys received them all, gave them audience, but kept her own counsel. She sent Yara to Volantis with ships, to see for herself what rose in the fire. Yara's first letter arrived 6 moons later, written in a rough, hurried hand. "There were tens of thousands gathered in Volantis," she wrote, "and the temples blazed day and night. The true phoenix was a young woman with a scar like a star across her cheek. Her voice like thunder, her eyes like embers. She claimed to have seen visions in the fire, visions of dragons old and new, of a queen of ashes and a child of promise. She spoke not only of gods, but of a new order, a world ruled not by blood, but by flame." The council debated long and bitterly. Tyrion counseled caution. Prophets and zealots could burn out as quickly as they flared. Sansa warned that the faith of the Seven would not look kindly on another god's fire rising in Westeros. Brienne reminded them that war, once begun, was not easily ended. But Daenerys listened and remembered. She knew that power was never truly won, only borrowed for a time, always at risk. She sent her own letters east, summoning the true phoenix, offering peace and warning that Westeros would not bow to fire any more than it had bowed to ice. As the year waned, rumors thickened. A strange illness in the east, visions of dragons flying over the summer sea, ships vanishing in storms. Yet Westeros held, and King's Landing thrived. Rhaego grew, the dragons soared, and the queen watched, always vigilant, knowing that the tides of the world would turn again. One night, a storm battered the city, thunder shaking the towers. Daenerys stood at her window, watching lightning dance over the bay. and felt the weight of every crown and prophecy and hope that had ever rested on the Iron Throne. The world outside was restless, hungry, filled with old magic and new ambition. But within the walls, for the first time in a lifetime, there was peace. Daenerys held that peace close, fierce as flame, knowing that it was as fragile as a dream and as precious as the dawn. Okay. Night gripped kings landing in a velvet hush, the city's fires dwindling to orange pinpricks among the sprawl of slate and stone. In the highest tower of the Red Keep, Daenerys Targaryen gazed into the darkness beyond the city walls. The wind toying with her hair, the stars glittering like icy daggers overhead. The air carried the scent of fresh rain and smoke, and somewhere, faint and distant, the lingering musk of dragon. She had come to love this hour, when the world fell quiet, and the burdens of rule could rest a moment on the windowsill beside her. Drogo entered in silence, barefoot as the Dothraki at heart always were, his braids heavy with gold. He watched her for a moment, his silhouette a mountain against the candlelit stone, and said nothing. In the hush, the city felt suspended between dreams and waking, the future hanging by a breath. Daenerys was not so naive as she had once been. She knew every peace was fleeting, every dawn could turn to storm. But this night, at least, the peace held. She turned to him, her voice soft. "Do you remember the Dothraki Sea, Drogo? How the grass moved like waves under the moon? How we felt the world was endless." He stepped to her side, his arm warm across her shoulders. "I remember. You said the world was not endless, only waiting to be found." He smiled, his teeth white in the gloom. "You found it. You made them kneel." She smiled, leaning into him. Below, the city slumbered. A beast tamed for now, but never truly docile. They stood together in silence, the world vast and unknowable, their kingdom resting like a coin on the edge of fate. The morning brought business as always. Letters stacked high, envoys waiting in marble halls, lords eager for favor, the city bustling as though war and death had never touched it. Rhaego arrived in a flurry of laughter and bright eyes, dragging his governess behind him, a wooden sword clutched in his fist. He was growing fast, already riding ponies and slipping away from his guards. The city's alleys and markets, a wonderland of adventure. Daenerys made time for him, walking the gardens, teaching him the words of old Valyria, the ways of justice and mercy, her stories a tapestry of victories and wounds. He listened, solemn and sharp-eyed, but it was Drogo who truly claimed his spirit, teaching him the sword, the bow, the ways of the horse. Rhaego would run wild through the training yard, Dothraki boys and Westerosi squires alike trailing in his wake, their laughter a promise that old wounds might, in time, heal. The city itself changed with each season. The old flea bottom burned in the last war was rebuilt, broader streets winding through neat rows of homes, new wells sunk to keep the water pure. Gardens blossomed where ashes had once lain, and Daenerys made it a habit to walk the city each week, listening to her people, learning their wants and fears. Gold cloaks stood straighter now, and even the brothels hung lanterns of red and black, their keepers eager to curry royal favor. Yet, always, there were shadows. Across the narrow sea, word spread of unrest in Volantis. The true Phoenix gathering followers in the firelit plazas, red priests stirring the old faith to new frenzy. In Dorne, some young lords spoke quietly of independence, the old Martell pride sparking anew. In the Westerlands, the Tarlys and Lannister remnants grew restive, their power diminished, but their hate undimmed. Daenerys answered with diplomacy, then with gentle threat. A visit from a dragon overhead, a generous contract for wheat, an offer of royal pardon for a stubborn bannerman. The red priests grew bolder with the turning year. Their temples flourished in the poorer quarters, their sermons promising salvation by fire and fortune for the faithful. Some hailed Daenerys as Azor Ahai reborn. Others called for a new world ruled by the flames of Aralor alone. Melisandre counseled vigilance, her eyes dark with warning. "Fire brings light, but it also blinds," she said. Some who kneel at your feet will one day raise daggers to your heart, if their God demands it." So Daenerys held council, and debated, and acted. Yara returned from Volantis with grave tidings. A fleet of warships building, red sails stitched with the phoenix and flame, a woman gathering sellsword captains and exiled Westerosi alike. Tyrion's spies reported agents in Braavos and Lys, whispers of plots against the Iron Throne, of coin changing hands, of assassins trained in shadow. One night, as Daenerys dined with her family and closest friends, a silent bell tolled from the docks. Word came. 3 ships burning in the night, the harbor bright with sudden fire. The flames were soon quenched, but in the embers they found a sigil, a phoenix painted in red, the symbol of the fire priests across the sea. Tyrion arrived breathless, dust on his boots. "They want you to see, Your Grace. They want the city to know your peace is not unchallenged." Daenerys considered, her mind racing with old lessons. Her brother's madness, her father's terror, her own promise never to be ruled by fear. She rose, summoning her council to the great hall. That night, the city's lords and captains stood beneath the dragon banners, the charred remains of the saboteurs displayed for all to see. Daenerys spoke to them, her voice as clear as the bell of the sept. "There are those who would see the world burn, who would trade peace for chaos, hope for fear. I will not be ruled by fire or shadow. We are one realm, Dothraki and Westerosi, north and south, free folk and night, old gods and new god. All who choose peace have a place at my table, but any who raise hand or blade against my people, I will answer with fire and blood." Then, it was not the Mad King's threat. It was a promise that her justice would be swift, her mercy for those who asked, her wrath for those who harmed. The people cheered, and in the streets the phoenix banners came down. Quietly at first, then with violence as loyalists took matters into their own hands. The months passed, the city holding its uneasy truce. Each challenge brought new tests. A fire in the granaries traced to an old Lannister night. A riot in the fish market, quelled by Grey Worm's steady hand. A plot uncovered by Missandei's clever spies. But for every trouble, Daenerys offered justice and rebuilding. The city's poor found work in the new gardens. The city's children learned to read and count. The Dothraki settled lands beyond the city, turning their herds to the green hills, their songs ringing out over wheat and barley. Rhaego grew tall, lean as his father, but with his mother's searching eyes. He tamed a wild horse in the hills north of the city, named it Ash, and rode like a storm through the streets. The people loved him. He listened to their stories, raced through the markets, laughed in the rain. The old wounds of conquest faded, replaced by a pride that King's Landing had not known in a generation. Yet the peace held only as long as the winds stayed fair. News came. Volantis had fallen, the true phoenix triumphant. Her fleet sailed west, her followers swelling with every port. She promised liberation, a world remade in fire, and for those who had suffered under old kings, her words were honey and hope. In the taverns of King's Landing, some whispered that the Dragon Queen was old power, that fire should rule and cleanse the world anew. Daenerys knew she could not wait for war to come to her. She called her banners, summoned her dragons, and sent envoys east, words of peace, of alliance, of warning. The Phoenix replied with prophecy. A duel of queens, fire against fire, the world's fate balanced on the edge of a knife. Drogo prepared the Dothraki, forging them into a host stronger than ever before. The Unsullied drilled on the beaches, their shields shining, their spears unbroken. Yara's fleet patrolled the narrow sea, ready to meet fire with steel. Before she departed for war, Daenerys visited the Godswood, knelt beneath the old weirwood tree, her hand in Rhaego's. She whispered the old prayers, and new ones. Prayers for peace, for wisdom, for strength. Sansa came to her, her face solemn in the green twilight. "Do you trust her?" "This phoenix?" "No," Daenerys replied. "But I trust the people, and I trust that justice must be more than fire. If war comes, it will not be by my choosing." "Nender," Sansa squeezed her hand. "Then let us pray it does not come at all." But war did come. The Phoenix fleet sailed from Volantis, red sails snapping, their ships bristling with mercenaries and zealots. In every port, they gathered more: runaway slaves, hungry peasants, bitter exiles, all chasing the promise of a world reborn. The clash came on the sea. Yara's fleet met the Phoenix in the Narrows, dragonfire and wildfire alike lighting the dawn. Rhaegal and Viserion soared, their roars thunder in the storm. The true Phoenix revealed herself in the thick of battle, a woman in scarlet, her hair a banner of flame, wielding sorcery the world had not seen since Valeria's doom. The battle was chaos and glory. Ships burned, men drowned, the sky split with lightning and fire. Daenerys rode Rhaegal, her voice carrying over the thunder, rallying her captains, binding her realm in blood and hope. Drogo fought on deck, his Eric flashing, Dothraki leaping from ship to ship, the songs of the grasslands ringing out even in the heart of the sea. The Phoenix hurled fire and shadow, her voice promising the end of the old world, but Daenerys stood firm. Her dragons, her people, her hope unyielding. In the end, it was not fire or prophecy that won the day, but courage, loyalty, and the memory of every life she fought to protect. The Phoenix fell, her ships shattered, her dream of a world remade in flames smothered by the sea. The survivors were shown mercy, prisoners treated with dignity, exiles given the chance to return home. Daenerys would not repeat the old cruelties. She was not her father's daughter, nor her brother's. Peace returned, this time stronger for the trial. King's Landing flourished, its walls thick with ivy, its people proud. Rhaego grew to manhood, his heart divided between the horse and the crown, his laughter echoing in the halls. The dragons nested above the city, guardians of a new age. And Daenerys, queen of the realm, breaker of chains, knew that every piece was a gift bought dearly, to be cherished while it lasted. She watched the city each night, her family at her side, and dreamed not of conquest, but of a world where peace was not the prize of war, but the birthright of every child born beneath her sky. Ya, Mun, Tao. Years unfolded across Westeros like the petals of a winter rose, first tight, stubborn against the cold, then opening slow and hesitant as the new rain proved itself again and again against the bitter frost of old wounds. The shadow of the last war gradually faded, but never truly vanished, not from the hearts of those who had lost brothers, fathers, sons, nor from the quiet places where memory lingered. In the cobbled alleys of King's Landing, in the wind-carved valleys of the north, in the ruined towers of the Westerlands, Daenerys' rule deepened with the passing seasons. Spring followed the Phoenix War, and brought with it the stubborn green of new hope. Rhaego's childhood was golden, lived in a city that remembered fear, but now trusted in the dragon banners that streamed above the Red Keep. He ran through the corridors with a wolfhound at his heels, learned his letters from Missandei and his swordplay from Brienne. He spoke the rough tongue of the Dothraki to the horse boys in the mews, and the clipped syllables of the Reach to the maids who brought flowers for the queen's rooms. Daenerys watched him with pride and a trace of longing. Each day, Rhaego grew taller and bolder. He looked like his father but carried her calm. Drogo taught him to ride, to throw a spear, to greet every sunrise as a gift. A Khal who sits on stone must never forget the wind, Drogo would say. Sometimes, after dusk, Daenerys would find father and son sitting on the highest balcony, their legs dangling above the city, counting the lights along the Blackwater and the distant fires from the Dothraki camps beyond the walls. The city was alive in a way it had not been for a generation. Blacksmiths' hammers rang through the day, forging not swords but plowshares and hinges and wheels. The river docks were crowded with ships from Braavos, Old Town, even distant Yeti and Korth. Silks and spices, strange beasts, and laughter in a dozen languages. Daenerys made herself visible. She rode through the markets, spoke to merchants and mothers and stonemasons, accepted petitions in the square before the Sept rebuilt, always flanked by Unsullied and Dothraki in a mingled uneasy peace. There were still troubles, bandits in the riverlands, firebrands preaching in the alleys, the faith grumbling about the new world. But the realm was learning. The dragons themselves were less a terror than a legend now. Rhaegal and Viserion circled the city each day, vast shadows over fields and towers, sometimes landing atop the Great Sept or sprawling beside the bay, their golden-green eyes watching the children play. Sometimes, when Daenerys flew above the city's rooftops, the small folk would pour from their doors and cheer. Their fear faded to awe. The royal court grew to reflect the changing realm. Tyrion, gray-haired but sharp-tongued as ever, managed the treasury and kept peace among the old houses, with a mixture of wit and ruthless honesty. Sansa returned often from Winterfell, her own children at her skirts, never quite comfortable in the southern sun but never unwelcome. Gendry Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End, grew into a lord as solid as the stone he ruled from, and brought Stormlanders to court who once would have spat at the idea of a dragon queen. Yara Greyjoy held the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea, her fleet grown large and prosperous. Dorne, ever wary, sent its princes and princesses to be fostered at court. Sun-browned children learning to joust and ride alongside Rhaego, their laughter echoing in the sun-drenched courtyards. The Riverlands sent Edmure Tully's grandchildren, and even the Reach, still healing, offered sons and daughters to learn the ways of the new order. Yet there was always the threat of old ghosts. In the first years after the Phoenix War, a conspiracy was uncovered among the Tarlis, and a handful of disgraced Lannister knights. Plots to poison the wells, to smuggle in hired swords from across the sea. Daenerys dealt with them not by fire, but by justice. Open trial, confession, mercy for the innocent and exile for the guilty. Only those who struck again, in the dark and without remorse, felt the fire of her dragons. It was said quietly that the new queen did not relish blood, but neither did she shy from it when her people were threatened. Somewhere along the ragged edge of the world, rumors always persisted. The true Phoenix's followers lingered, scattered and desperate, worshipping in secret, hoping for another prophet or savior. Some vanished into Essos, others found uneasy peace in the free cities. Red priests sometimes arrived, robes bright as blood, bearing tidings of omens and visions, but none could rally a host or challenge the queen's power. Most grew content with small temples, quiet prayers, and the knowledge that the Lord of Light's war for the dawn had passed. The greatest challenge to Daenerys' reign in those years was not war, but winter. 3 years after the Phoenix War, a deep chill gripped the north and crept south. Crops failed in the Westerlands and the fields around Old Town. Snow fell in King's Landing for the first time since Daenerys' arrival. The small folk grew hungry, and some remembered the old days of fear. The queen emptied her granaries, sent ships upriver loaded with wheat and fish. She commanded the city's masons to repair every hearth and roof. Sansa rode south with wagon trains of potatoes and roots. Gendry sent blacksmiths and axes to clear frozen roads. In the north, the wildlings and Starks alike opened their stores and feasted in their halls, remembering the old songs. Rhaego helped, handing out bread in the square, riding with his father to oversee the digging of new wells. The people began to call him the Prince of Winter, a name he bore with quiet pride. Daenerys took strength from his kindness. She rode the dragons north in the worst of the storm, dropping bags of grain to villages snowed in, warming fields with fire where frost threatened the early barley. It was during this long winter that word arrived from Essos. Ships flying strange banners arrived at the harbor, bearing envoys from the free cities, Pentos, Myr, Lys. The old order in Essos was breaking. Merchant princes overthrown. Old families fled, the cities in chaos. Refugees crowded the docks, and Daenerys received them with dignity. She established a new district for the exiles, gave them land to work and tools to ply their trades. Some of her lords grumbled, but the city's wealth only grew, and with it, a sense of cosmopolitan pride. King's Landing was no longer merely the capital of Westeros, but a city for the world. For Rhaego, adolescence was a tempest. He craved adventure, riding with Dothraki scouts beyond the walls, racing the river's length, learning the wild joys of the green hills beyond the reach of the city. Yet he also studied, sometimes grudgingly, history with Tyrion, languages with Missandei, justice with his mother. Daenerys was patient, letting him make his mistakes, but she never let him forget that one day, the peace they built would rest on his shoulders. He made friends of every house, Winterfell, Sunspear, Old Town, even a Tarly whose family once swore vengeance. There were quarrels, broken arms, secret rides at midnight, but always Rhaego returned to the Red Keep, more seasoned, more ready for what would come. The realm changed with him. The Faith, once an enemy, found a place in Daenerys' council. She met the High Septon in the rebuilt Sept of Baelor, and together they announced new laws. The Faith would tend the poor and the sick, and the Queen would respect their rights. In exchange, the old punishments for heresy were abolished, and the temples of Aralor and the old gods flourished beside those of the Seven. Daenerys grew older, though age touched her lightly. Her hair turned from silver to moonlight white. Her face lined only at the eyes. Drogo aged as Dothraki do, a braid thick with gold, his presence a shadow of the old ways. They remained partners in rule and in love, the city whispering their names as the years drew on. And always, there were threats. Bandits to the east, a pirate fleet from the Stepstones, a false king rising in the Westerlands with a motley host. But these challenges no longer threatened the realm itself. Daenerys and her council faced each in turn, some with fire, some with gold, some with quiet mercy. The greatest challenge came not from men, but from the past itself. One winter's night, Rhaego vanished from his chambers. The city searched for 3 days, fear mounting, every alley combed by Unsullied and Dothraki alike. At last he was found in the crypts beneath the city, kneeling before the tomb of old Aegon, first of the Targaryen kings. When Daenerys found him there, he was weeping, not out of fear, but out of the crushing weight of what would one day be his. "How can I be ready?" he asked her. "How can any man or woman rule after you?" She knelt beside him, her cloak pooling on the cold stone. "You will rule not because you are perfect, but because you care. You will rule because you remember the stories and the scars, the war and the peace, the price we paid for every season of hope. You will rule because you love this city and its people. That is all I ever had, Rhaego. The rest you will find as you go." He pressed his face to her shoulder, and in the silence of the crypts, a promise was made. A future rising from the bones of the past. When the first green returned to the fields, the city erupted in celebration. Rhaego led the festival, riding through the streets on his great black stallion, laughter and song rising in his wake. Daenerys watched from the balcony, Drogo's arm warm around her, Tyrion and Sansa and their families beside her. The dragons soared above, their shadows passing over the crowds. That night, when the city danced and drank beneath the stars, Daenerys slipped away to the highest tower. She looked out over the lights and the laughter, the river and the fields, the distant shimmer of the sea. She remembered every hardship, her brother's rage, Khal Drogo's pyre, the long years of hunger and war, the threat of darkness from beyond the wall, the Phoenix War and every scar and triumph since. And in her heart, Daenerys Targaryen felt at last the thing she had sought her whole life. Not victory, not conquest, but peace, fragile and fierce, a fire that would not burn out. It would not last forever. Nothing did. But in that moment, she cherished it and whispered a prayer to every god she had ever known. Let this last. Let this be the start of a better world. Beneath the banners of fire and silver and dawn, a new age unfurled in Westeros. Not an age of perfect peace or happiness, but of hope, and for a time, that was enough. Nia. The wheel of years spun on, inexorable and silent. Yet each season under Daenerys' reign carved new grooves in the memory of the realm. The scars of war faded not in oblivion, but in new growth. Ivy clambered up the old burned walls. Children's laughter replaced the howls of fear. And for every hunger that gnawed at Westeros' bones, the Queen found a way to answer. Spring brought the city alive. On the banks of the Blackwater, Flower festivals spilled through the streets. Petals flung from high balconies. Music played on strange Essosi instruments. Feasts where Dornish wine was poured beside northern honeymead. Daenerys often walked the markets disguised in plain dress. Rhaego at her side, seeing for herself the faces and hands that built her city. She listened to the old men tell tales of Robert's rebellion, of dragons and mad kings, and found the bitterness in their voices, giving way to wry humor or gentle pride. The people were remembering, not just surviving. The council chamber grew more lively with every passing year. Tyrion's silver streaks matched his wine, and his jests had grown sharper for the children who watched him over their ledgers. Sansa Stark's eldest daughter, Lyanna, learned diplomacy by sitting in the queen's lap and asking pointed questions. Brienne's squire, a sturdy boy of mixed Dothraki and Stormlander blood, bested 3 knights at the harvest tourney and brought the victor's laurel to Daenerys, bowing so deeply his forehead brushed the flagstones. The peace Daenerys forged had become an expectation. Lords who had once sent gold for swords now sent scholars, stonemasons, healers. The queen welcomed them, just as she welcomed the envoys from the free cities. Older now, bruised by chaos in Essos, more interested in trade and learning than in schemes or swords. She sent her own, Missandei, wise and calm, as emissary to Braavos, Gendry, strong and honest, to the workshops of Pentos. Every returning ship brought new books, new seeds, new ideas. The Dothraki found their place too in this world of stone. Their camps spread out beyond the city walls, herds of horses grazing among the rolling hills. Smoke from their fires rising with the dawn. Some had taken to farming, others served as scouts and outriders for the queen's army. The old Dothraki ways endured in feasts and song and the teaching of young Rhaego, but they mingled with the customs of the land. Each spring, they raced their horses in a great circle around King's Landing, a celebration that drew half the realm to watch and wager. Rhaego, now grown near to manhood, bridged worlds as easily as he leapt a stream. He could read High Valyrian and the Old Tongue of the North, recite the laws of Andals and Rhoynar, ride bareback with the best of his father's blood riders and strategize over the painted table with Tyrion and Sansa Tarkal. He grew close to Lyanna Stark, 2 heirs, shadowed by their mother's legacies, learning together how to carry the future. Sometimes, Daenerys watched them spar or debate beneath the lemon trees, a fierce hope rising in her that the world might truly be changing for the better. But peace in Westeros was never a gift without cost. The faith, cowed and diminished after years of defeat, found new fire in the hearts of the poor and the fearful. A hard winter brought hunger to the hill towns, and rumors blossomed. Daenerys was a foreigner, the dragons an ill omen, the old gods displeased. The High Septon sent word from Old Town, cautious but pointed, warning that her mercy might be seen as weakness. Daenerys did not shrink from the challenge. She rode to Old Town in the company of her dragons, her son, and 100 banners. In the Great Sept, she knelt before the altar and swore to protect the realm's faith, just as she protected its people. She opened the royal granaries to the city's poor, invited the 7's most learned scholars to the palace to advise her on law and justice. She allowed the faith to minister to the sick and dying in the city's poorest quarters, and walked among them herself, hearing their stories, their prayers, and their fears. Gradually, the tension eased. The High Septon wrote again, this time with gratitude. Daenerys' mercy did what Dragonfire could not. It won loyalty, not just obedience. From the east, the old world still stirred. Volantis, broken by the wars of the Phoenix, splintered into city-states. A new council of merchant princes asked Daenerys for treaties. The Red Priests were quieter now, focused on prayer and healing, their temples a source of comfort for the lost and the exile. In Pentos and Lys, merchants spoke of a dragon peace, a stability not seen since the Valyrians ruled. A challenge came from the Iron Islands, as they always did. A new claimant, the son of an exiled Greyjoy, tried to rally the Ironborn to rebellion, promising them the old way and the right to raid. But Yara sailed north before war could spark, and in a rain-lashed moot upon the rocks, she faced the claimant and beat him in single combat. The Ironborn bent the knee, not just to Yara, but to the Dragon Queen who ruled with strength and gave them more ships than any king before. The only real unrest came in the far north, where wildlings had settled the gift and the new blood of the Night's Watch mingled uneasily with theirs. Fights broke out, a murder was committed, and Jon Snow rode south from Castle Black to beg Daenerys for aid. She rode north herself, meeting the wildlings in their new halls, listening to their grievances, sharing bread and salt with their chiefs. She decreed the gift free land for any who worked it, no matter their birth, and ordered a new order of rangers to keep peace. Jon watched her, pride and sorrow mingling in his face, and when they parted, he called her Queen of the New Dawn. Winter eventually faded, and the spring that followed was the richest in memory. Fields bloomed with wildflowers and grain, and even the poorest small folk feasted. The city's children, of every blood, every faith, danced beneath the dragon's flight, and old songs rang from every tavern. That summer, on the anniversary of Daenerys' coronation, a great tournament was held. Nobles from every corner of the realm attended, from the Martells of Sunspear to the Manderleys of White Harbor, from Tarth to the Tullys. Rhaego and Liara led the opening parade, the dragons flying overhead, banners streaming. The queen herself presided, her hair now pure silver, her eyes bright as ever. Drogo watched from her side, his pride unconcealed, a legend now spoken of with reverence by those who once feared his name. At the feast, Tyrion toasted the peace, Brienne recounted the tale of the long night, and Sansa presented Daenerys with a new crown, forged of gold, iron, and silver. 3 metals, 3 kingdoms united. The night ended in music and laughter, and the bells of the city rang out until dawn. But change is the oldest truth of Westeros. As Daenerys watched her son dance in the torchlit yard, she felt the future pressing close. Rhaego would come of age at the next turn of the moon, and soon he would take more and more of the realm's burdens. Lyanna Stark would one day be Warden of the North, her wisdom already renowned. Together, the two had begun speaking of a union, not just of marriage, but of realms and hearts and dreams. The city whispered, sometimes with joy, sometimes with envy. But Daenerys knew that this was what all her striving had built, a chance for new life, new peace. On the night before Rhaego's name day, Daenerys walked the city alone, cloaked in wool, her hair hidden, the crowds unaware of their queen. She walked from the old gates to the dragon pit, past bakeries and blacksmiths, septs and temples, the laughter of children following her steps. She remembered Meereen, Astapor, the long journey through the Red Waste, every wound and every grace. She ended her walk at the harbor, watching ships sail for Essos, the moon gilding the waves. She closed her eyes and let the cool breeze wash over her, thinking of the future, of all the wheels broken and all the ones yet to turn. When she returned to the Red Keep, she found Drogo waiting. He said nothing. He never needed to. He drew her into his arms, and together they watched the city sleep. And in that silence, Daenerys understood what she had wrought. Not a perfect peace, not a world without pain, but a legacy of hope, a foundation that her children and their children might build upon. For as long as Westeros remembered the Dragon Queen, it would remember not only fire and blood, but mercy, and the promise that even a land haunted by war could one day be reborn in the dawn.